Kia ora koutou, folks. Thanks for coming along to hear about this presentation today. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see many familiar faces in the virtual crowd. I'm going to have a stab at the Burwood Academy karakia, which has been a while, so forgive me if my pronunciation's a little bit Australian. Whakarongo, ki ngā hae mano e kārenga nei, tui, tui e. Tui e te rongo, tui e ke raro, tui e ke waho, tui e ke roto. Tui e te herere nā tangata katoa. Te uri, tihei nako, tihei Māori ora. Listen to the many voices that are calling. So bind and weave, bind from above, bind from below, bind from without, and bind to south. Weave to the bonds of the people. Carry your descendants, let them adorn us. This is the breath of life. So as many of you know, this mihi and karakia is to acknowledge the mātarangi which Whai Tahiri and Whai Meri Hibs have installed in gifting the Haere Mano to the Burwood Academy Trust. And it's actually quite fitting because today's presentation we're looking at capturing the voice of many people involved in the disability support worker sector. But before I start, as many of you in the room will know, I'm currently on a 2-year placement over here in Sydney, working for the John Walsh Rehabilitation Centre, hence the reason why I'm presenting online. But I've just realised that if I was in New Zealand, I'd still be presenting online, so it's not actually that different. So before I left Christchurch last year, I was honoured as part of my capacity at the Burwood Academy, working as a Plex researcher, to receive the Canterbury Medical Research Foundation inaugural Emerging Researcher Fellowship grant. So I'd just like to pay acknowledgement to Melissa and the team at CMRF. It was a fantastic honour to receive the grant, and this is where the funding went, essentially. So to start things off in this space, the project was titled Conceptualising Positive Relationships Between Disabled People and Support Workers. It's been an area of interest for a while that I've had, and so I just want to go through and just give a bit of background to the topic in the area before describing some of the research that we did. So as many people will know, around 24% of people in New Zealand live with disability. And in Canterbury, it's approximately 20%, based on some work I have done with Philip Schluter from the University of Canterbury, where we analysed the Canterbury Wellbeing Survey data. And while we don't know the exact amount of people who require support workers, many disabled people need support workers to help them participate in their communities. And a key point I want to emphasise here is just how vital and necessary disability support workers are. It's not kind of an optional 30 minutes of exercise in the afternoon or having someone to help grate your carrots, although it can be. Disability support workers are essential for disabled people to exercise autonomy. People's survival essentially depends on them. If a support worker doesn't show up in the morning, people are literally left in their beds. And so it's really quite a vital and necessary service. And it helps them to mobilise, complete personal cares, complete activities of daily living, and everything in between. And we know that the disability support worker sector is complex. It involves different people. There's support workers, there's agency coordinators, there's clients, there's whānau members, and each of these groups of people not only have a different role, but are impacted by the relationship in different ways. And there's also changing work environments. There's domestic houses, there's community environments. There's also different funding and employment arrangements. There's funding through the Ministry of Health in New Zealand, and there's also funding through ACC, which provides quite disproportionate funding schemes between those two. We also find there's support workers who work for agencies and clients who employ support workers on a private basis. So there's a lot going on in the space. And of course, we also know that the disability support worker sector is under pressure. Support workers report they're undervalued a lot of the time, they're prone to burnout, and disabled people, or Plex, are finding it increasingly difficult to connect with quote unquote good support workers. So the Burwood Academy has been doing a bit of work in this space for a while. For example, there was some work a couple of years back led by Joe Nunley, looking at people who went and they were admitted to hospital and then would have access to their community support workers while they were in hospital. And that study reported that these relationships can often reduce the anxiety and the likelihood of people developing secondary health complications, because the support workers knew their cares, and that put the people at ease. And some other work we conducted a few years back with Sarah Derrick and Martin Sullivan with data from the New Zealand Spinal Cord Injury Study. We reported on how the impact of relationships during the transition from inpatient rehabilitation to the community subjects relationships to a great deal of disruption. And people often go through a renegotiation period where roles within relationships are changed. And I've also written about how support workers can enable people to enact a sense of autonomy and interdependence through partnership, helping people achieve things in their life. Internationally, there's also been a lot of great work, but I did want to just shine a bit of light on some really wonderful work done by Megan Topping, Jacinta Douglas and Di Winkler in Melbourne. I think it was Megan Topping, PhD. They interviewed disabled people, family members, and support workers to develop a grounded theory about what works for each group. And some broad themes just quickly identified by the team included the fact that autonomy and the ability for the person to exercise choice and control was a key priority. They also found that the context surrounding each person and the unique circumstances that a person brings to a situation needs to be respected, and that people work constructively together. Interestingly, at a sector level, they really emphasise that building quality systems in the background is essential to developing the workforce. And they also raised the need to make sure there's some degree of accountability within the disability sector or agencies to make sure that this area is kind of sustained long term. So it's against all of this background and this complexity that we still find there's an urgent need to better understand what factors contribute to positive outcomes for different groups. Looking at this can help to identify any tensions between those involved, and also what resources are needed to facilitate sustainable positive support worker relationships going forward. So this study used a realist participatory methodology to understand essentially what works for disabled people, whānau members, and community support workers. So we collected data from 3 groups, the ones just mentioned, and we collected data through a combination of reflective activities and co-design workshops. The study was conducted between July 2022 and July 2023. And as I mentioned at the start, was funded by the Canterbury Medical Research Foundation. And I was also really fortunate to have the wonderful help and assistance of Julianne Johns and Rochelle Martin. Rochelle helped with a lot of the method advice, and Julianne was just a fantastic assistant to have working on the project, and also were my they also were my helped out on the ground in Christchurch when I couldn't be there. So just a brief look at some of the participant profile. We recruited 16 people, 5 Plex. And for those of you who haven't heard the term Plex before, when I say Plex, I mean that the person with lived experience of disability. So we had 5 Plex, 5 whānau members and 6 support workers. And just a couple of quick points of interest. The majority of participants had 5 years experience, either being disabled or if they were support workers working in the support worker sector for over 5 years. The majority of the participants either received work from agencies, received support from agencies or worked for an agency. There were a mixture of impairments and conditions, cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy mainly. And the whānau members were a mix of parent and partners. In terms of data collection, the first round of workshops were conducted in December 2022. And in the first workshop, we had a flexible interview guide informed by literature in the field and the written exercise that we had people fill out. And that was used to guide discussion, although we wanted things to remain flexible. So we encourage participants to tell their stories in their own words. And interviews were transcribed subject to reflective thematic analysis. And so with the data from the first round of workshops, we organised that into 8 themes across the 3 groups. And in the second workshop conducted in March 2023, we invited participants to respond and discuss and prioritise those themes that we identified in the first workshop, with the goal of developing an initial framework of what works. So just a quick look at what those first themes looked like. These were the themes identified through the first round of workshops. They were independently coded by myself and also Julianne, and then we came together with the entire research team and used manual diagramming to compare and discuss and debate how each theme was expressed by each participant group. For example, we have communication, flexibility and scope, expertise. So we were looking at how those things applied to each group, and they were often quite a bit different. So with these 8 configurations, we presented them, as I mentioned, at the second workshop. And then with discussion with the participants, they kind of prioritised and showed us what they thought were the most important. So from that, and from our transcribed recordings of the second workshop, we developed 3 context, mechanism, outcome configurations. And in simple terms, that's just what works for whom and how. And essentially, the findings from the study indicated that positive, sustainable relationships depend on several context outcome conditions. The first one is having clear communication. The second one is building trust. And the third is a feeling of sustained flow. And the third one's quite interesting because it's kind of, I like to frame it as you're playing the long game in this area. People who receive support workers don't just need them for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It's often lifelong. So what's going to make it sustainable going through? So I'm just going to dive into these CMO configurations in a little bit more detail now, and share some of the quotes from participants, which are kind of the most powerful aspect of this whole presentation, I think. So here's the first one, And in this CMO configuration, we found that having a culture of clear communication was the foundation on which a positive relationship was built. So having clear communication between support workers, disabled people and whānau helped all the stakeholders to understand both what are the expectations of different roles, but also really importantly, what ideally are the boundaries, which are not always realised. But in theory and in practice, if the team had clear and open communication about what needs to happen, when and where, that's the context, this enabled expectations and boundaries required of each role to be known and discussed and negotiated, which would lead to an increased likelihood that all parties felt respected, trusted, and known. So just some brief quotes here about the importance of communication from each group. There was a quote from Plex: communication is kind of key. That supports how you're going to work together. And a whānau member said, you know you've made a connection if you can communicate some things that you're sharing and not go into a big long explanation or whatever. And a support worker said, I think that kind of goes on top of everything, communication. I think it all kind of starts and ends there. So each group thought communication was really important. And of course, there's also tensions within communication. This was probably one of the most telling quotes from a Plex participant, sorry. And this refers to, having the showers and having personal cares early in the morning. I just need to get out of here. I don't need to get into the whys and the wherefores of Donald Trump at 7 in the morning or whatever. So in terms of I just need to get out of here, the Plex participant was referring, I just need to get out and get on with my day. I don't need to kind of expend all of my energy chatting about, something where I might have a point of disagreement like Donald Trump at 7 o'clock in the morning. A whānau member mentioned, we're all in this house together at times and things happen, but I don't want to hear my husband to be telling me about someone's marriage problems or someone's child is in trouble with the law, or kind of those personal details from a support worker's point of view that might extend beyond the ideal boundaries set by the family and the Plex member. And then a support worker mentioned, interestingly, there's some carers who have already stepped over that boundary. And once someone stepped over it, it's hard for the one to stick into the rules to maintain the flow. The second context mechanism outcome configuration was around the issue of trust. And because this type of work is often intimate and takes place in people's homes, participants emphasised that building trust is vital for the success of an ongoing sustainable relationship. And if groups had trust that their or their loved one's support workers can complete tasks in a competent, confidential manner, that was the context, then relationships were conducted with a sense of reciprocal trust between people, and that's the mechanism. The outcome was that it enabled each participant group to feel able to manage issues such as privacy, confidentiality, and safety, which are easy to say, but really difficult concepts to kind of work through in the real world. So again, I just want to share a couple of quick quotes around this. From the Plex perspective, it's trust, mutual trust, and empathy. If you've got those two, you're a long way down the track. And likewise with whānau, trust is a huge thing because my partner has no short-term memory. So having trust in the person who's supporting him, that they're not just going to leave him to flounder on his own. And trust was really interesting, I found, from a support worker's point of view, that there's the trust there that they can leave their family member with us. Because quite often it's the case that people are in the support worker role because they care for people, they're altruistic, they want to help people. So if people kind of believe in them, it kind of validates their sense of purpose, which I thought was quite interesting. Obviously, there were some tensions around trust as well. A Plex participant said, you need to feel comfortable in yourself. You need to feel comfortable with that person. And then, comfort, and then you can kind of focus on the other part of your day. Because often this area is just one section of the person's day. A support worker mentioned, nobody's communicating well together. Something's not right. How can I trust the people around me when I'm not sure of the lay of the land, so to speak? And I suppose I wanted to put a little bit more emphasis on how trust was particularly complex for whānau members who, without high levels of trust in support workers, they felt there was a great sense of responsibility, which was also closely connected to feelings of guilt. And this was kind of twofold. There was a feeling of guilt that they needed to be close by or help to manage things just in case something went wrong. For example, if something bad happens to their loved one, the whānau members could feel it personally. As this whānau member said, he's had toenails ripped off recently and stuff. Just the way that they're handling him, and I feel so guilty because if I'd done it, it wouldn't have happened. I know that for certain. And secondly, that sense of guilt was also a significant barrier which stopped whānau members taking respite time or trips away. Trust was an essential factor if genuine time out was going to be rejuvenating and fit for purpose. Because otherwise, the family and whānau members would just spend any time away worried the whole time about their family members. The third context mechanism outcome configuration was around a sense of sustained flow. How do we develop positive support worker relationships that can be maintained over the long term? And it was validating each person's place in the relationship through, as we've just mentioned, clear communication and trust. And that allows, in an ideal world, ongoing negotiation of workable expectations. All groups can then feel that there's been, quote, a job well done, which contributes to the ongoing success. And just some quick quotes to kind of speak to that. Plex participant said that the support worker, they've been there a while, there's a natural rhythm. They know what needs to be done, when and how. And that's why if you find someone good, you try and hold on to them. And a whānau member mentioned a good carer obviously knows that it's your home. They don't pick things up and move them, or a good carer is respectful of their workplace being your home. And from a support worker's perspective, that the client is comfortable, that they've had all of their activities of daily living provided for in an adequate way. We know they're safe and they're warm and they're looked after. And that last quote from a support worker really speaks to the idea that altruism is a big factor. Because a lot of support workers, like I mentioned before, they want to be validated in kind of their sense of purpose and their sense of value in the whole relationship. Obviously, there's tensions as well. Plex participant said, I'm tolerant, but I'm not going to put up with that on a long-term basis. And that was a lack of kind of trust and comfort and respect for boundaries and things like that. Because I'm just living my life. I just want to get on with things. And it illustrates the fact that dealing with support workers is just one part of their day. And so they just need to trust that a support worker can help them complete the tasks that they need to do, and then be facilitated to kind of live whatever is happening in their lives. Interestingly, from a support worker's perspective, I think we're here to provide the same level of care, but the situation around that isn't always the same. And a big issue here was funding, specifically Ministry of Health versus ACC. So support workers would see people who had objectively the same needs, whether it's the physical needs or the personal care needs, but received very unequal uh, contributions of funding from the state. So support workers, because they were often such caring people, would try and compensate for that disparity on their own. But it was really hard for them to kind of see that unequalness. And some tensions finally in this area for whānau members were highlighted by the quote a participant said, "I'm tired of it. I'm tired of worrying about caregivers not showing up for shifts or texting at the last minute. So I live on a knife's edge, constantly worrying about whether he'll have a caregiver." And it just speaks to that ongoing sustainable tension that whānau members can experience. So the last part of this presentation, I'd just like to speak to some of the aspects around the discussion about where these findings kind of sit in the broader scheme of things. So essentially we found that contexts which facilitate high levels of communication, trust and validation activate mechanisms which promote positive sustainable relationships. So if you've got those first three things, the chances of having some positive outcomes are very much increased. In particular, the findings of the research suggest that clear communication and trust can help to manage issues such as privacy, confidentiality, and safety for those involved. Doing so ultimately helps disabled people and support workers and whānau members to flourish and support workers to feel valued in their work. And our findings support previous research on this topic, which has identified that communication, trust and validation contribute to positive support worker relationships. And just to speak to a few issues that I thought were quite important. One of them was definitely boundaries and trust. So having agreed upon expectations about the boundaries, well, it was a key tension identified by all participants, particularly the line between work and friendship, becoming too familiar in family affairs, or oversharing of personal information, and things like that. And it's really hard because the Plex members and the whānau members, they have support workers in their lives for multiple hours a day. It's impossible not to develop a relationship. But participants in the study also said, because we asked, well, what helps? And they said that negotiating boundaries and understanding an individual's unique set of circumstances can definitely be helped by having support workers and disabled people establish consistent visits, so having the same support worker consistently, and matching support workers to clients based on personalities and shared interests. And obviously you need an adequate support worker workforce to be able to kind of make those matches. Casting a wide net, this point kind of just refers to the fact that these relationships affect a lot more than just the person receiving the care or the person providing the care. It impacts on people's families and the whole wider life of people receiving care as well. So even though they're only employed to assist one person, it ultimately impacts on the entire family unit, on spousal identity, on distribution of domestic roles, of boundaries, privacy, confidentiality, and just the general routines. And I did want to just speak to this quote from an Australian study done by Pullen and McKenzie, who looked at long-term care from families' point of view, and long-term was greater than 5 years. And there was a quote here that it was all-encompassing and involved the development of complex personal and social processes aimed at keeping the family unit together, protected from intrusions to privacy, and sustainable into the future. And I thought that was a pretty powerful quote. So what are some potential solutions? Because it's one thing to identify the problem, but then what are we going to do about it? And participants in our study highlighted several resources that can help to mitigate these challenges. And these included, just to do a quick scan of them, having competently trained support workers, having adequate funding for support workers to be provided so that family members can have genuine respite breaks. Because often we heard stories about people who are having to cut back on their cares to save up their quota of care funding so that a family member could go away for a decent amount of time. And also agency support. Support worker agencies were felt to be that extra layer of resource and also a trail of accountability. And these resources need to be flexible for different circumstances. For example, some cliques preferred support workers who weren't formally trained, as it made it easier for them to instruct them to learn their routines, which just emphasises the need for effective communication to discuss what people need in their individual lives, and be guided by the Plex's expertise in unique circumstances. And the last point around the discussion I'd like to make is what I said earlier, just about how this is kind of the long game. And I called it the long game because many people who require support workers are going to require them for the remainder of their life. So they'll be present and will be included in people's domestic environments and interacting with family members for a long, long time. So we can address the long game based on what we found in this study through a way that recognises the wholeness of the person with the lived experience, so that they can exercise autonomy to pursue their life roles. And addressing the long game can also be through looking at the needs of whānau and the overall family unit, making sure they're considered and that whānau can feel free to pursue their life roles without feeling that guilt or feeling they are abdicating responsibility if they go away and focus on themselves. Our support workers can feel supported if they can be encouraged to express their compassion and their problem-solving skills, and that they leave their role feeling satisfied, significant, and accomplished. And in terms of the long game, the tensions identified in this area kind of relate more to systemic areas like the overall availability of support workers, the funding within the sector, and having a kind of background infrastructure to facilitate and support a sense of security for all different groups involved. And these issues have been raised in the literature too. For example, Megan Topping called for a renewed focus on personal training to complement kind of skills-based qualifications. So teaching interpersonal skills and raising the issues of boundaries and talking about, trust and privacy, all of those kind of complex things that participants in the study said it's really, really important that they're addressed. And there was also another study done by Moscow et al. Who argued a similar thing, that skills and competencies taught to support workers need to move beyond just tasks. Like, instead of just going, this is how you use a hoist, this is how you look for pressure areas, which is important. There's no doubt about that. But it needs to look at that interpersonal stuff like that. So, with all of that, what's next? I think it's important to keep the outcomes and the findings of this in context. It was a very much a locally focused study in Canterbury. 16 people. And there was also a kind of lack of Māori or Pacifica perspective. And from a methodological perspective, this work kind of informed what we call an initial theory, which now kind of requires more work and testing and some bigger samples. But what I take away from it personally is I think any future work done in this area will definitely require partnerships between researchers and those with the lived experience, and also advocacy, for the likes of the New Zealand Spinal Trust and people working in the advocacy space, because I think it is just such a big issue. But that's essentially just a quick broad sweep of where the last year's gone in this research. There's a bunch of references there if people want to read about this in more detail. But I'd just like to finish by thanking everybody for their time today. And with more specific look at the study, really want to thank the participants for sharing their time and their energy and their stories and revealing some quite personal stories and examples of what happens in their life. Also Julianne Johns for her incredible work in the background, and Rochelle Martin for her energy and her methodological advice. And of course the Canterbury Medical Research Foundation for funding this research. Without the funding, it wouldn't have been possible. And from the entire team at the Burwood Academy Trust. Thanks very much, and happy to take questions or anything like that. So thanks everybody. Are you there, Anna? Did you want to facilitate any questions or?
I'm here, and people are welcome to speak up if they like. Otherwise, you may have just presented so well that you've answered all the questions that they might have. But any comments as well are just welcome for any other work that people might be aware of in the same area or anything like that.
Can I ask questions? Sorry, my camera's off, so I can't wave my hands around. I don't know what's wrong with my camera, but I don't know how to have to wait for my IT person. Johnny, thank you. That was really good. Really got me reflecting because I had fitted in to each of those three groups that you interviewed at some part in my life, either as a family member or a carer or a person with lived experience myself. One of the things that as a person with lived experience I have noticed is the difference it makes when the person who's a carer is able to reflect and be empathic and to have a bit of consideration about the ways that they behave is on the impact of their caring parts. And I wondered if that came up at all in your study. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself right.
Yeah, thanks very much for the comment. So if I'm hearing you right, so from the perspective of the carer or the support worker, is that what you mean?
No, from the perspective of the person being cared for, a lot of the things that I have experienced is the times when people do things without thinking about the impact of what they do, like that person you said lost their toenails. It feels to me like there was a lack of reflexivity on the impact of what they were doing, and I wondered if that came up in your study.
Yeah, well, probably from the perspective of people receiving the care and also the whānau and family members. That's often where they felt a little bit kind of, I suppose you could say, let down or just a little bit glum, really, because if people didn't take, glum's putting it politely, if people didn't feel like they were being genuinely kind of cared for or looked after, or the person providing the care wasn't doing it to the best of their abilities, it really opened up a feeling of vulnerability, whether it was physical things through the toenails or that their needs weren't being prioritised, or the person was just there to get out as soon as they can. And it's just,
trust.
and we know that disabled people can have a really tough time of it in general in society, and it's just another example of how that can manifest. And that's why I think the whole sector needs to be really robust for people to have trust and not expect it like it's I've got a really good carer, this is great, because it should be a given. I think.
As can I add to that too, Johnny? My recall too, certainly from the workshops with the people with working as carers, really valued support from their employers and their agencies. This sort of fits under the area of communication and what disability support workers needed. They did want places to vent, they did want supervision, they did want affirmation that they were doing good work as part of a job well done. And so really good communication with their employers was something that they valued, and that opportunity to talk through things that haven't gone so well. So they did speak to that need for reflexivity or reflection. And
and we know
that was key, and it was an issue. It was issue, and I think sometimes too, if they're working within a team where they felt that other members of that team hadn't done their best work, it was really important to think about how, as a team, they could do better. So that was from their perspective, it came up also, as well as in the other two groups.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Pip, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, I'm sure, because I'm sure John, very interesting work. I wonder if any of the people with lived experience had their own budget through individualised funding or EGL, and whether if there were there differences between the experiences?
Thanks, Pip. There were. We did have participants that did have individualised funding schemes and used their budget. And I think there were pros and cons for each one. For example, a pro of the individualised funding was that they felt they could be a little bit more specific about who they employed. So they would kind of, could be a bit more individualised in their criteria when they interviewed people. So one participant, I think I recall saying, I don't actually want anyone who's trained as a nurse. I want them untrained so I can train them myself, because I don't want them coming in here with any kind of any kind of paternal notions of what care I need. But of course, the flip side of that is that they had to do a lot of the kind of administration stuff in the background, and also if a carer didn't turn up, they might not have that backup of an agency to find someone else or that have that trail accountability. So there were pros and cons to both. Thanks, Pip. Kia ora.
Great. Any more questions?
Kia ora koutou. I'm Lisa Foster. I'm doing some work with Meaningful Mahi. It's really great to be here and hear about the research. It's excellent to see all the different perspectives. The point that I think was sort of sticking with me in the sense of having that boundary and being able to work on those boundaries. I used to work for Enliven as a team leader, and boundaries came up as an issue time and time again. And it's a really complicated area to get it exactly right, because each situation and each whānau is different. And I think that's an area maybe to have more research and have more development, and get more insights into how that could be a solution in a practical way. And just in the chat, I saw this, Sally and Philip are talking about, you know, how do we make it, bring it into the real world in the sense of bringing these solutions and making them effective. And I was reflecting on the fact that Meaningful Mahi has a provider forum, a monthly provider hui, and there may be some opportunities to bring in some of the learnings directly to the providers in that sense, or there may be opportunities to kind of join the dots. So yeah, just really putting that point out there, those 2 points, to say thank you very much for the, you know, for being able to have this research completed and to share it at this forum. Thank you. Kia ora.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa, for the reflections. Appreciate it. No more questions?
Kia ora, Johnny. Just before you wrap up, I just want to say how delighted I am on behalf of CMRF that you were able to complete this research. I know it was an interesting time with relocating to Australia as well, but it's fantastic that you were able to have the support of Julianne and Rochelle and all the rest of the Burwood Academy Trust team. And as you know, as part of the process, it was an absolute delight for us to see someone who was so passionate about this area when you went through the whole application process, and even the findings that you've brought out of a relatively short study. I hope that this is just the beginning, and it creates opportunities to be able to collaborate with other researchers and organisations, and really it's just reinforced what I think you and I talked about at the start, that there's a huge opportunity for growth and knowledge, and to encourage participation from so many who are involved from all different aspects. And the fact that you had a study that, you know, included the whānau, the social, the support workers, and those with lived experience was really important to have those different perspectives. So I think, you know, you've done an incredible piece of work, and as I say, I look forward to following your continued success and all the wonderful work that you and the rest of the team are doing. So well done, well done.
Yeah, thanks very much, Melissa, and thanks to the CMRF for kind of broadening the lens of what constitutes good health as well. The biological is always really important, obviously, but it's you know, what happens once the biological things are relatively stable and people are out there living their lives in the community. Yeah, so thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Right, well, just a word from Burwood Academy, just letting you know that we don't have a research forum scheduled for next month, so you might hear a bit of radio silence from us, but then we'll be back in November, and I think we've got Susan G presenting about projects happening in the space of dementia. But so if you've attended today and you're not on our list, you can get back in touch with me and I can put you on the list. Or if you'd like to share this information with someone else, this has been recorded, so therefore we'll put it on YouTube and it will be attached to our website shortly, and you can share that around. So thanks everyone for coming today. Any final words, Johnny?
No, just to reiterate what you said there, Anna. Thanks everyone for taking time out of their day to come along, and yeah, hopefully I get to see some of you in the next year or so at different functions. And yeah, no, it was wonderful to get everyone's perspective. So for the academics in the room or people that are interested, hopefully we'll have this published in the next 6 months or so. Fingers crossed. So thanks very much, guys.
Great. All right. See you all.
Thank you.